Is it okay now?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I did mention that one day my grandmothers always tell me these things, that their father lived here. As I mentioned here the other time, that Inyas Big Knife is my great-grandfather. That was my grandmother's father. In his days, that in them days, and before that even, first white people ever come around, they moved in their covered wagon, come over they came from east, and one day they noticed that there was some fast travelers, young guys, used to go around. Only way that they go around in them days is they would walk. They'd walk wherever they went. And they were fast walkers, they traveled fast. So some of them went that way, just to be curious about what they hear. There was some other kind of people that had come around Kalispell Place there, you know. And they did get over there. And they seen that it might be the time that they already had horses. Somehow they had horses, and the old-timer women folks were riding on the horses. So they all got over to Kalispell. And that's when they met with them. They didn't never call Suyapis either. That they just started calling Suyapis here a while back. In them olden days, at that time I'm talking about, they didn't know them. They did have no names for them either. And that's when they started calling them hairy chests, because that's when they seen them, and they were kind of shocked to see how they were. I guess they had long beards and whiskers, and clear from their cheeks on down to chin, and would hang down and all that there. And somehow, how did they ever see that their chests were hairy, clear down all over? And there might be some young ones that didn't have that yet, and they were pale looking, you know, white, pale. And when they met with them, and they couldn't speak to one another because Indians didn't know any English words, then I believe they were mostly French too, mixed. They can't understand French, and well, anyway, however they communicate and however they start in, you know, but maybe by signs. That's why right now we want our signs to come back to the children's too. And I'm the one that teaches sign language, you know, the best I can, what little I do know. It's probably that I really don't know all of it, but... And so the white people were happy to see them, and the Indians were still wondering about the white people, how come they were so hairy and pale looking. Well, anyway, they were nice to the Indians, and that's when I mentioned about they had cows. They must have had their cows with them, you know, lead them around, take them over this way. They milked their cows, and they knew, of course, they already knew that deer and elk and moose and all that have milk when they get their little ones, and the little ones would nurse on their mother, and they knew what milk was. So they seen this, they call it monster. in an Indian way, word, monster in Kootenai. They call him Akhamukuo. That means a big monster. That's how they call the cows, you know. They sat in there and they started milking it with a big bag like that. They've never seen such a big bag like that on the elk. Hasn't got that big of a bag, and deer's got a small one, and they all stared and watched, and those women folks dragging their skirts and middies, they call middies with those, white people call it midi and skirt, you know, now we say blouses and that. There were middies in the olden days. And they milked the cows and started, and it must be hot yet, and they started giving the Indians to drink the milk, and which they did. And they liked it. And these white women had many materials, and they used to only have certain kind of materials. Now you have a million different kind of materials in your stores now. And fabric stores, you go in and you can pick out anything you want, from silk to wool. Those olden days, they have khakis. And later on, they have ginghams. There were only the two kind of cloths that the Suyapis had, you know, in them days. So they started making yardage, yard after yard, and give maybe 2 yards to each woman, Indian women. And they were happy to see something new, different, you know, that they ever seen, and they never had it. And these white women meant to give the materials to the Indian women so they could sew up their dress. But they didn't look at it that way. They thought it was given to them to put it over their horses and use it as a blanket. And they all did. They just threw it over their horses, and when they got back on, they covered their legs with it, and they used it for blanket, and it was a material to make a skirt and a midi. And after they drank the milk and seen the hairy chest guys, and then when they got home, they had special meeting, and they were telling the people that didn't go over there what they have seen. They seen some people that were new, and some of them were pale, and some of them were hairy, just nothing but hair on themselves. As far down they could see was nothing but hair. And, oh, yeah, is it so? And did they talk? Oh, yes, they talked to us, but we couldn't understand them. And we also drank something, they have a monster there, and they started milking the monster, and we drank that monster's milk. And it tasted really good, you know, it tasted good. That was cows. And that's how they got to get with them. And then later on, they'd go back, and then finally they see some cans. And later on, they seen some glass. And they'd run home and say, there's something there. They give us that, and we pour water in it. You could see the water, but it didn't spill. And that was glass, you know, that day. And then when they'd have these baking powder cans, coffee cans, something like that, and they'd put something in there and cover it, and it wouldn't spill. Because their days, they only used to use, as I mentioned, these barks. They just fold them together and make a little basket or whatever, things like that. Build their pots from mashed rocks and put them together, make a pottery and stuff like that. Never seen a can of glass or anything. And then that baking powder cover, they take it and they scare themselves because they never have any mirrors. And once you're born and start to come up, you grow to be a woman and all that there, you never ever knew how you look. What you look like yourself. And if we didn't have mirrors now, we'd never know how we look, you know. And then they were just shocked to look into this baking powder, whatever can it was, the cover, and they could see themselves. And that wasn't a very good mirror, I would say that, you know, it's a blur-like. But that scared them. Because they never did see those things before. Maybe they might go in the water and the reflection and maybe they see themselves there when there's still water, you know. They can see. And that's the only thing they ever used for mirror, nothing else. But then they start to see things, glass that they have for water. Then right among them, when different ones would go and, I understand you have this. Yeah, you want to look at it? They'd take it and it would be a glass here, look at it. Pour water in there. It'll hold it, it won't spill. So they would test it, pour water and it would feel like this. And it didn't spill, it didn't come out through anywhere, but you could see it. Would you want to part with it? I'll give you a good horse for this. And this one person sit around and thinking, oh, I might go down that way. Then they understand that there was going to be more and more those hairy chest people. Then they gave them the name, hairy chests. And that's why I say now they call them Suyapi, you know, wherever that Suyapi comes from, because now we call it Suyapi, the planets call it Suyapi, the Nespers call it Suyapu, and the Colville Indians call it Suyapi. You know, all surrounding reservations, they all started calling the white people Suyapi. But in the olden days, they call them hairy chest. That's what it was.
You know, I'm just realizing something. I didn't know how late it was getting. There's a phone booth down in Dayton, isn't there?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go down there. I have to call the